Good morning, everyone. It's Sunday and I'm here to start making a little bit of breakfast for my family. And I decided to share with you my biscuit recipe. They always come out nice and fluffy and light, and as a Southerner, trust me, I appreciate a good biscuit, even if I can't really eat a whole one anymore. I'll take what I get. So let's get started. What you'll need is 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 3/4 cups of buttermilk, and what I used for buttermilk is 1/4 cup of Greek yogurt, plain, and 1/2 cup of milk. Mixed them together because I didn't have any buttermilk, but this is a good alternative. It's just as thick and it gives just the same amount of tartness. You'll also need 4 ounces of butter, which is 8 tablespoons, or a whole stick. I keep mine frozen and then I grate them, and that way it's easier to mix in later. After that, we are going to need 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, and we're going to use that to make our biscuits. Also here I have additional buttermilk to brush onto the tops once we're ready for them to bake, and I have a little extra flour for when we're getting ready to roll them out and cut them. Let me grab my flour and my butter. So I kept my flour in the freezer as well as the butter. I've already grated my butter up. If you can see, it looks like a heck of a lot more than 1 stick, but it is not. And this is just plain unsalted sweet cream butter. And this is my 2 cups of all-purpose. The reason I keep them frozen is because it keeps the butter and everything else from melting in, and so you get more flakes and more layers from your biscuits, which I love. So yeah, worth doing. And I only had this in the freezer for maybe half an hour. Alright, so to the now mostly frozen flour, I'm going to go ahead and add my butter. And for those of you who have never really done any kind of pastry before, this is the part that you call cutting in the butter. It's where you're trying to get it to a sandy texture. So mix your butter in, cover it with the flour, and you're going to take the fork and just start mashing around the edges to break the butter apart and mix it in with the flour until you get something that looks akin to very coarse sand. You can have larger pieces of butter in it. So it's kind of like if you've ever seen anybody make puff pastry. It's the same idea of keeping little pockets of butter. So it is now ready. There's a tiny bits of gravel, but then there's the sand-sized pieces as well. So we're going to make a well in the center, which is where you push everything in the center to the sides, leaving a little bit on the bottom. And into that we're going to put our sugar, and this also has the salt in it. And then our baking powder and baking soda. Alright, and back to the well, now that we've mixed all that in thoroughly. And we're going to add our 3/4 of a cup of buttermilk, which again is 1/4 cup of plain Greek yogurt and 1/2 cup of milk. Mixed together, I let it sit for maybe 20 minutes. And you're just going to start folding from the outside, which means you're going to be scraping across the far side of the bowl and bringing it under. So you're scooping it or folding it in, because you don't want to overwork biscuits. You only want this to be mixed enough that it's moist. You'll still have some loose flour, and that's fine because we are going to need this as well, which is why you don't want to over mix it. And so if you see, I have a very coarse crumb with my biscuit. Now take some of your extra flour that you've kept and put it out on your very clean counter. And we're going to get our biscuit and just pour it right out onto the counter. Make sure we get everything because there is butter stuck on your fork and you don't want to waste butter. That would just do the cows injustice. Or goats. Goat butter is amazing. Now we're going to bring this together. We may have to add a little bit of extra moisture today. I think my flour is very dry. So what I'll do is make a small well in the center, grab a little bit of milk. We're just going to add it maybe a tablespoon at a time until we get it right. We're going to have to add a little bit more milk. And this is how we dial it in to the perfect amount. And from looking at it, I'm going to go ahead and add 1 more tablespoon. You don't want this too wet, so you need to be cautious. Do just a tiny bit more than a tablespoon. Since I froze my flour, that dries out quite a bit of the moisture that's inside of it. And so that makes it a little bit on the thirsty side. So here's our little ball of biscuit. We're going to have to flour the surface a little bit more. You will have to knead this. You don't want to knead it like bread though. You're just going to be turning it and folding it in half. Pressing it down and turn it again. Sprinkle a little flour on this side because it's a little moist. And last one, 10. The reason we're only doing 10 folds is because we don't want it to overwork the gluten. This is one of the times where you don't want it to be a bready texture. So we're going to just do a couple of folds, and the folding itself also gives us lots and lots of layers. And if you have your dough still very cool, the butter will still be fairly solid inside. If it starts to warm up a little bit, pop it in the freezer for 5 minutes. It's not going to hurt it. All right, so now flouring our rolling pin. We're going to roll this out to about the first joint of my thumb, which is right around 3/4 of an inch. Okay, and we're just going to start cutting. And just like when we made the English muffins together, the reason I'm cutting is because it leaves an open side, so they'll raise a little bit better. And there's 5. Now, you don't want to overwork your biscuits. So once you've cut and you have all your excess, fold it maybe twice. Just make sure everything's pressed together. You may not have the prettiest biscuits after that, but you don't want the dough overworked in the slightest. Roll it back. Perfect. All right. Down to the last 2 biscuits or so. Now just fold that, fold it, so it's recombined and nothing more. So cut out the center. And here's where your dough comes to its end. So we're down to the last biscuit's worth of dough. We're gonna press that out to about the right depth. Cut. And there we go. So be sure to preheat your oven to 425 degrees. I've already done so. I should have said so at the beginning. And I'll make sure that's in the notes down below. Now, I'm going to take a baking sheet and line it with some parchment. You don't have to do this. I just really like parchment for baking. One of the best secrets I ever learned about baking biscuits, make sure they touch. I know everybody likes to have that nice, perfect outside, but think of it this way. These biscuits, they can rise pretty well by themselves, just like people, you know. You're alone, you can do quite a bit of it yourself. But if you have your community holding you, if you have the biscuits touching you, you can go even higher. And we're going to brush a little bit of buttermilk on the top of each biscuit. So from here, my oven is preheated. We're going to bake these. Top rack of the oven. So we're going to go ahead and let them bake for 15 minutes, and I'll be right back. All right, so it's been 15 minutes. It's been a little bit more than that. And I let my biscuits rest on the counter for about 5. And as you see, they turned out nice and golden brown. The pan is still warm, but they are nice and brown. One got a little lopsided. That's okay, they got happy. But as you see, nice and fluffy. When they came out, I pulled them apart so that the points where they were touching could finish kind of drying as well. And that way you get that nice crumb all the way around. But if you look, lots and lots of layers too. And when you break it open, you get lots of flake. I hope you enjoy making these just as much as you've enjoyed making anything else. If you've enjoyed making them, I can't assume. And I will see you next week. Y'all have a good one. Bye.